The San Antonio Spurs land another promising young player with much upside to him. We break down here what he could mean for the San Antonio Spurs roster moving forward for this coming season and how he fits in with the San Antonio Spurs. This on Spurs Digest with your host, Keenan Warner. Before we get into breaking down this young prospect that the Spurs have acquired, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Take a spur of the moment to get every Spurs moment. A report came out today. The San Antonio Spurs and Brandon Boston Jr. have agreed to a deal. League sources told Hoops Hype the 22-year-old guard will compete for a roster spot. He spent the past 3 seasons with the Los Angeles Clippers and averaged 6.2 points in 12.9 minutes per game. He did have a 27-point game against Boston where he was showcasing his talent. For many people, they might not know who Brandon Boston is as a player. I'm going to break down a little bit of what his career has been thus far and what he can provide to the San Antonio Spurs. So, out of high school, top 7 recruit. He was a guy lanky, long, had a lot of talent, especially where the game's going today, where you want those lanky athletes who have the handle, can shoot from the perimeter. He checks all those boxes off. He goes to Kentucky. This is a year right after COVID. They didn't have the championship. Kansas wins the AP poll, and they have the shortened season. And Kentucky goes 9-16. They were actually the preseason favorites. They had one of the best recruiting classes. Them and Virginia were plus 750 going into that season for college basketball. Ended up being Baylor beating Gonzaga in that championship game. And Kentucky had one of their most disappointing seasons. One of the seasons that ultimately led to the departure of John Calipari. That's another conversation for another day in his tenure there. But Brandon Boston was a part of that team. He led the team in scoring, was only 11.5 a game. He wasn't quite efficient, and his lack of strength in his body, has a wiry body, semi-build, kind of like what Brandon Ingram came into the league as. There's another comparison. Jeremy Lamb was his comparison coming out of college, and I think that Jeremy Lamb is a good comparison for him. Some of his highlights are he is now 6'6", coming out of the draft, he was 175. He's bulked up to about close to 190 now. You can see that he's added strength with the strength and conditioning coaches in LA for the last 3 years. So he's a guy who has all the tools. If you're just asking, okay, so what do we need? We need some shooting, we need some ball handling, we need some athleticism, we need some defense. He can give you all of that. It's will the work ethic and will the strength. Will he be able to add that strength, and will he be able to translate to making proper and good additions on the basketball floor in his stints that he's playing? And he showed in LA and for LA last year that he was able to do that from time to time. He's shown over the 3 years. Towards the end of the season, he had a 23-point game, showcasing kind of what he had. This was obviously when Kawhi Leonard wasn't playing, James Harden wasn't there. The Clippers were kind of in the, we don't really care where our seed falls. We know we're going to be top 5. We'll kind of ride it out wherever we ride it out at. So they were in flux, so he wasn't playing with the starters, but what he was doing was showcasing the fact that he does have talent and he can play. So the San Antonio Spurs, what I think they're doing with this move here, overall, just to show you, this was his last season. It was 5.2 points, 1.6 rebounds. Didn't shoot great from 3 overall. For his career, he's actually a 31% three-point shooter. So last year was a little bit of a down year. But a player like this, when they don't get too many opportunities, the percentages kind of are hit or miss. Like 2 years ago, he had shot 40% from 3. So it's hit or miss on what you see 3-wise. But what he can add to this team is a sense of urgency for the 8 through 12. Obviously, we don't know what the roster is going to look like. They have too many people at the bottom of their roster that they're going to need to cut. Of course, when you go through, they just got Jalen Champagnie. They just got Malachi Flynn to go along. They have Cisco. They've got Sandro. Wish I could pronounce his last name, but unfortunately, that name's a tough one for me to get out. They have Blake. They have so many younger pieces towards the end of their depth chart and end of their roster that they're going to be fighting for roster spots. And this is another piece to come in to fight for a roster spot. And why not take a chance on him? He's young. He's only 22 years old. Clearly, he was a top 7 prospect for a reason. Not that that means he has to be. He has to be, but he was supposed to be a lottery pick, and the season just didn't work out for him. You end up going from a lottery pick to pick 51. So get him in there, see what he can do. He has put on some weight. Can you get him to buy into your system? He's got the talent. If you have the talent, maybe now you get the coaching. And of course, how many better coaches are there ever than Gregg Popovich? You can name them on maybe 2 fingers, if that. Phil Jackson, and that's the list. So, Gregg Popovich, if you want a guy to help develop, we've seen him develop talent. We saw him develop Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard came in as just a defensive stopper kind of guy coming into the league. He turned himself into a 2-time finals MVP. He turned himself into one of the better players of this generation. And that was large in part to what San Antonio did with him. And another thing that Gregg Popovich loves to do is they want to ease people along. They wanted to ease Wemby along. They're going to give him a bigger workload this year comparatively to last year. They're going to obviously ease Chris Paul. Chris Paul's not going to play 82. They want to ease these players to not have them overworked. That was a big thing. They were the first team that really started load management. It was sitting Tim Duncan, Manu, and Tony Parker in a game in February because of the fact that they were playing for May and June. So Gregg Popovich has always been about being conservative with his players, and if you're going to be conservative, you better have players on the bench who can step up and play, and this guy has the talent to step up, make plays for this roster, and if he doesn't even make the roster, he has enough to push these late roster spot guys to get better, to try to develop, to make camp competitive. We know who the top 9 are going to be. It's going to be Wemby, Vassell, Sochan, Chris Paul, Harrison Barnes, Zach Collins, Tre Jones, Castle, and then you've got Malachi, not Flynn, but you've got the other Malachi. So you have those 9, and then you've got Champagnie, you've got Flynn, you just picked up again Brandon Boston Jr., you've got Cisco, you've got Harrison Ingram. There's so many guys towards the back half of this roster. Some of them will see G League time too. So it's really going to be a great competition. It's going to be a great camp to follow day in and day out because a lot of these guys are playing for roster spots, and with a roster this young, they're going to get playing time. Even if it's 10, 12 minutes, you can still make yourself a piece in the league. Again, Jeremy Lamb, as I said, would be his comparison. Jeremy Lamb's a guy who didn't play too much. He came to the Thunder coming off themselves a championship run against Miami Heat, and then the next year they ended up losing to the Spurs, and they just kept going on. Jeremy Lamb found himself onto a ready-made roster later in the draft and kind of developed his way into being a guy who could put up 15 points in Charlotte. Sometimes your journey takes you some places, but he became a guy who was a notable name and a notable player in the league, and I think Brandon Boston can be just that, a guy with high upside, high potential, length, checks all the athletic boxes. Can he put together his skill with talent? And there's not a better place to do that than San Antonio with Gregg Popovich leading the way. Let me know in the comments what you think about Brandon Boston joining the San Antonio Spurs, being there for training camp. Do you think he's going to make the roster? Do you feel he's just there to kind of help push the bottom of the roster to get them back into shape? What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. This again has been Spurs Digest with Keenan Warner. I appreciate all of you, and I'll see you guys soon.